As a new coalition sets up to rule Israel, Prime Minister-elect Benjamin Netanyahu has put his foot down, reportedly saying that Religious Zionism leader Bezalel Smotrich will not be defense minister. This comes after local media reported on very heavy American pressure on the incoming government. Netanyahu said he intends to keep the defense ministry in his own party, which boasts former generals and intelligence heads with the experience needed. Smotrich and Likud negotiators gave each other the cold shoulder for a week before a meeting last night reportedly made things even worse, throwing coalition-building talks into disarray. Will this point break the presumptive coalition before it even has a chance to start? We're joined in studio by correspondent Batya Leventhal to explain the often confusing and often infuriating details of Israeli politics. Batya, what do we make of these reports popping up in the Mariv newsletter that Benjamin Netanyahu is ready to ally with his former rivals rather than with Bezalel Smotrich?
I think heavy pressure, as you mentioned, is an understatement here. The United States has been very clear that they don't interfere in other countries' political state of affairs, and yet here we have one of Israel's biggest allies getting extremely involved in how the Israeli government is setting up, in fact, their new government. It's very clear that from this report, it's being denied across all three of the factions within Israel. We're talking about both the Likud party, the National Unity Party under Gantz, as well as Yesh Atid under Yair Lapid. All three are saying that this is either fake news, and with the other two camps are saying that they've made it very clear they are not going to be sitting in a government headed by Benjamin Netanyahu, who they believe is really quite corrupt and has a very different ideological game plan than they do, as well as sitting with the ultra-Orthodox. And so from the Israeli perspective, it does sort of come across with a sort of questioning view as to how this report is remotely true. But from the American side, it's been very clear ever since the elections even began 2 weeks ago that there is heavy pressure on the administration towards Israel that is saying, we are your biggest ally, the second biggest population of Jews outside of the Jewish state, and we won't stand for having a government that is seen as less liberal and much more on the extreme side of the political spectrum. And so we're advising you kindly to please reconsider how you are going to be forming your government, because having extremists, I believe they also once quoted Ben-Gvir as being a terrorist, is not something that they are likely to be sitting down and working with.
And that brings up an interesting question, because Israel does have a very different outlook on life and very different political bend than the United States. Is this just highlighting a gap in how the two Jewish populations in those countries see each other? And where's this likely to go in the long term as the administration mounts more and more pressure on Israel to conform to America's progressive liberal worldview?
Absolutely. The reality on the ground is that this was a government that was brought in democratically. This is the will of the people. The majority of Israelis have voiced their opinion, and their opinion is we want a right-wing, a strong, stable right-wing government. And the United States needs to, in a sense, accept that that is the will of the people in Israel. Now, where the fine line comes in is whether Benjamin Netanyahu, and as I've been saying for weeks now, is going to appease his coalition partners, or whether he's actually going to put people in positions that have the skill and the expertise and the know-how. And I think that's also where the United States comes into play. A lot of the ministers like Bezalel Smotrich that he's considering or supposedly considering for ministers like defense and finance, he has no actual experience within these areas. And so from the United States point of view, perhaps their stronger argument would be rather give this to, ministerial portfolios to people with the experience, as opposed to saying, we're not going to deal with people that are on the far right wing of the spectrum. It doesn't bode well for them whatsoever. I saw also with the Mariv article that the United States is saying that this would also help with the relations between Western allies and EU countries. You have to remember a country like Hungary and like Italy, who have just had far right-wing elections and have far-right leaders, are more than happy to work with a country at the moment like Israel that has just sworn in a right-wing government. And so it seems like if the United States is serious about wanting to bridge that gap, as you put it, and that divide, they need to come from a very different perspective, as opposed to saying to Israel, you either go this way or we're out.